Welcome to my channel, So Simple, and we're going to make a pumpkin butter today, and it is very simple. We'll need the regular pumpkin, we need cloves, we need ground ginger. You can use fresh ginger, it'll be a little bit more spicy, ground nutmeg, cinnamon, and some sugar. What we are going to do is we're going to cut the pumpkin, slice in little pieces, remove the seeds, use the seeds later for roasting. We can dry them and then roast it later, and we can grind them later for gluten-free flour and use it in cookies and power bars and milkshakes. If you have a super duper blender, it's very healthy and very good for you, especially the green part of the seeds. It's between the actual seed and the shell, the outside, the little green layers. That's the best stuff. So let me get a knife and we'll go start. Make sure before you cut the pumpkin you wash it very well, because the dirt will get on the knife blade and then you'll transport it inside. You can use a small pie pumpkin and you can use a big pumpkin. I like to use big pumpkins. You can see the difference in thickness and you can see the difference in seeds. Pie pumpkin has smaller seeds and the bigger pumpkin has bigger seeds. I like to use big pumpkins because it's more meaty. Okay, we cut our pumpkin. We have little pieces. Actually, those are big pieces of pumpkin. We're going to cook in slow cooker for 8 hours. If you want, you can cut in smaller pieces. I have small pieces on the bottom, and then I just didn't want to bother cut them, but maybe I will. We still have seeds. Don't throw this away. This is the best part of the pumpkin. I'm going to, the seeds have this gooey part, and in order to separate seeds from the gooey part, you have to pour water in it, then you scoop out the seeds, and then they are standing without the gooey part, and then you put it on parchment paper on your cookie sheet, and just let it dry, and make sure you stir it occasionally so it does not get stuck together. And we have part for the compost. Don't throw away. Even if you live in an apartment, you can compost it in an apartment as well. You just need to have a right container for it. And we're going to put this pumpkin with all of our spices in a slow cooker. Now I have to measure 5 pounds of pumpkin. The recipe calls for 5 pounds. You don't have to be precise, and you don't have to have fancy equipment. Like, for example, I have just simplest kitchen scale, not digital, just a regular scale, and I would have to do 5 times because it goes only up to 16 ounces, which is 1 pound. And actually this, when the big pieces cutting style helps more, because you can put more on the scale. You can eyeball it, because you can always add spices later. Just don't do too many when you cook, because you cannot subtract, but you can always add more. So that's probably almost 1 pound. One more piece, and so that big pumpkin, actually not the biggest one, but medium-sized pumpkin, ended up being 5.5 pounds of cut up and cleaned up pumpkin, and it filled up to the top, but I think it's going to be fine. Another way, the recipe calls for 5 pounds. Another way to measure the pumpkin before is, if you don't have to have fancy stuff, you can do just the simple floor scale. Weigh yourself first, and then weigh yourself with a pumpkin, and then that gives you an idea whether it's going to be enough for one batch or it's too big or too small. It's time to add our spices. It's actually a little bit more than 5 pounds. It's 5.5 pounds. So I'm adding 1.5 cup of sugar. 1.5 cup of sugar. Then I'm adding some ginger. It's 2 teaspoons of ginger. 2 teaspoons of ginger. 2 teaspoons. I don't have fresh ginger, but I bet fresh ginger would sound much better and taste much better. Half teaspoon of cloves. Half teaspoon I like it actually a lot. I'll do a little bit more than half. So half means it's even, and it would be like that. That's perfect, but I grabbed a little bit more. And 1 teaspoon of nutmeg. 1 teaspoon of nutmeg. And cinnamon. It's called for 2 tablespoons, but I think it's a little bit too much. So I'm going to add 1 tablespoon. I think that should be enough. Not a complete full tablespoon, something like that. And I'm going to shake it and stir it a little bit so the spices will incorporate, and let it sit for a little bit so the pumpkin gives a little bit of juice and it won't stick to the bottom when it starts cooking. And then I'll put on 8 hours on a high and we'll see what happens.
Here's what happens after 8 hours of slow cooking. It reduces in volume, and I use the mixer to mash it up to the fine texture, and then we're going to put in sterilized jars.
Here how I sterilize the jars. They first start to fog up a little bit, and then they become clear, and the water, I'm not sure if it's possible to see right there, water rises up into a jar. Then it means this one is ready. So I put my pumpkin butter in the cooking pot because I missed when it was finished slow cooking in a slow cooker, because it needs to be put very hot into a jar, and you need to set the settings on low because it's going to make this puff like geyser right there, see, and it'll burn on the bottom. So settings on low. Then we'll sterilize our jars. The ones I already sterilized, I have them on the plate, and I'm going to use this tool to pull out jars from my pot. And it's actually just regular, and I use a towel to rest on a towel first. I'm using regular jars from other preserves we bought in the grocery stores. I also asked my friends to keep the jars. Just make sure the lids you use, you cannot grab the lids, but there's another tool that came in a set with a magnet on the bottom where you can grab the lid. Make sure the lids are not pocked. There are no holes when your friends were opening jars or you were opening jars. I am a very heat tolerant person, but don't do this. It's very hot. It's boiling hot. So I filled up the jars with pumpkin butter to the very top. If you could see in the profile, it's even rising a little bit. It's okay because I'd rather overdo it than underdo it. Then you screw the tops on just as much as you can, but then you would have to adjust it a little bit more once you pick up a jar. I use a silicone glove to pick up my jars and screw the top tightly on, something like that. It's easy because it has a ruffles that grips on jar, and it doesn't
Then
move.
just flip jars over upside down and put something warm on it. For example, a couple layers of kitchen towels, and let it cool down over time, and then your preserves are ready and you can keep them on the shelves, not refrigerated, for a couple years.